MacVoices is supported by Text Expander by Smile. Find out just how powerful a few keystrokes can be at textexpander.com. Welcome to MacVoices. This is the talk of the Apple community, and I'm Chuck Joyner. This is the second part of our interview with Michael E. Cohen, the author of the new Take Control book, Apple Interface Mysteries. In the first part, Michael told us about why this is not Take Control of Apple Interface Mysteries, the kind of things it covers, sort of the conceptual background behind the book, and why he was compelled to write it after thinking about it for so long. This time around, we dig into a few more specifics and get a lot of discussion about Apple interfaces in general, and why they're important. And I definitely want to point out to you, please watch through the end of the credits, because there is an outtake here, a section that we recorded after the formal interview that I just felt was too good not to share, and Michael agreed that I could share it. So watch beyond the credits, please. So with that, we're back to our discussion with Michael E. Cohen and Apple Interface Mysteries. You were talking about copy and paste on the iPhone, and that's something I wanted to ask you about. Because there are times it feels like Apple has experimented with certain interface elements or ways to do things, and they eventually go away. And
yes, that's true. I have a very good example of that in the book when I'm talking about the second half of the book. The iOS chapters are broken up into case books, and this is the iOS touchy text case book. And the subsection is called the Dancing Fingers Oscillation. And that has to do with how you tap on text and what it means to tap on text and how you select your insertion point. For a long time, Apple had a fundamental problem using your finger to select text, and that is your finger is fat, text is tiny. You touch the text on the screen, you can't see what you're touching because it's obscured by that fat finger of yours. So they gave you a little magnifying loop that appeared above the text, showing you what you were touching and showing you the insertion point in that text. So as you moved your finger along the text, that magnifying glass would move along above your finger, showing you the text that you were moving over. And that kind of worked pretty well, except that people expect to be touching the thing they're touching, not touching the thing they're seeing above their finger that they're touching. And a tendency for a lot of users is to move their finger up to touch the text that they're already touching. And the magnifying loop would become very frustrating for them. Finally, I think it was maybe iOS 12, but in iOS 13 certainly, Apple did away with the loop because they came up with a different strategy. You touch the text, and the insertion point gets longer. It's suddenly above your finger. So even if you sneak your finger down a little bit so you can see the text you're touching, you can see the insertion point. Your finger is now moving below the text, and the insertion point is actually moving along the text that you wanted to move along all around. And it happens almost unconsciously. The moment you see that little thing pop up above your fingertip, you just naturally kind of tweak your finger down just a little to see what you were obscuring before. And that works better than the magnifying loop.
Yeah,
but it took us to iOS 13 to get there.
Right. Well, it's an evolution. It's an adjustment. This is another thing that bothers me a lot about the pundits. And Apple should have tested this stuff out before it ever got to us.
Good luck.
And well, exactly. I mean, we all every single one of us uses our tech in idiosyncratic ways. And I'll go back to the enhancements of the Finder itself. They're dozens and dozens and dozens of things you can use to add things to the Finder to make the windows behave differently. One of my favorites is it's a utility that you drag a window to one of the corners of the screen, and it snaps to a particular size that you have already selected. I find that extremely useful, and I think there's something like that on Windows. But there are all these other interface options that I get with these utilities. I like them, but they might drive somebody else buggy.
Or at least confuse them because they don't know they're there, and suddenly some weird thing happens that they weren't expecting.
Right. Or to your example, where if you have expose up in the hot corner, I mean, hot corners, I know a lot of people don't even know about hot corners.
Mm-hmm.
And yet they can be extremely useful once you set them up, because now in four corners of your interface, you have four different things that are at your command just by
Mm-hmm.
dragging the mouse.
Exactly. So, well, anyway, this book covers a lot of that stuff and how we got from there to here.
Well, I listen, I think this is going to be a fascinating book, and it's going to be one that's going to be, if you have any interest at all in how we got to where we are, this is going to be a super enjoyable read.
I have no idea how Joe is going to sell this book, what the marketing is going to look like, how you pitch it. But at least I'm glad I got it off my chest.
Well, I would, listen, I think there are enough Apple enthusiasts out there that, the people that are interested in Apple history, well, this is a different kind of Apple history. This isn't necessarily the people. This is the product that we've all been using, either we just adopted it or for years. And why did it get to this point? And I mean that in the most positive sense because of the sophistication and power. And so, yeah, this is a great book, Michael. I love the idea. And now that I understand it, I love it even more.
Well, I hope you will when you read it. It was frustrating to write in a lot of ways because I constantly had to be asking myself, why is it this way and not that way? What is it I'm actually trying to say about this at any particular time? So it took a lot of thinking. Almost every section of it took a lot of thinking. I have several friends and relatives who know enough about this stuff that could pass ideas by them. They could say, yeah, okay, that makes sense. And they say, no, you're wrong. Try again. There was a lot of that going on in the writing of this. It made Joe crazy, certainly because he wanted a book to publish. And I kept saying, I'm not there yet.
Yeah, well, but now you're there, and now we all have that much more to enjoy. So thank you. Thank you.
Well, one thing, yeah.
No, go ahead.
One
Pardon me.
thing I did want to point out is there's something about interface conventions that once they start to stick, they're kind of like harpoons. They're hard to get rid of once they penetrate the flesh. And so some interfaces like the Macs have taken a long time to adjust to new user expectations. iOS, things moved much more quickly in that world with a much bigger marketplace around the world with a lot of different cultural expectations. So making big changes on iOS and iPadOS is not necessarily as difficult. You're not going to anger a very devout set of users. But, the harpoon analogy still applies. Sometimes you remove a feature because you found a better way of doing it and people will go crazy because they like that harpoon sticking in them.
Well, I think some of this, in a very loose way, applies to the rewrite of iWork, the iWork apps.
Mm-hmm.
That yes, first of all, as it was released, features were missing, but then some features got implemented just a little bit differently, so that even though yes, they're back, thank God, they weren't quite back the way you remembered them, and so you had to do a little bit of relearning. But at the end of the day, this is how we move forward. Michael, I keep telling everyone, that who don't want to learn something new. It's like you will not be using the same apps you are today 3 years from now, maybe even not 2 years from now. Yeah, they may have the same name, they may come from the same manufacturer or software author, but they're not going to be the same because they're going to evolve. They're going to have to evolve to keep up.
And I think that's a fundamental message for anybody who wants to use technology in their lives. It's going to change. It's always going to change. Expect change. If you want it to stay the same, you're in the wrong business. And that's a hard lesson to learn because, there's a lot of things you lose. I was infuriated when Apple dropped HyperCard because they couldn't get it onto OS X. I built a career at the Voyager company building multimedia and HyperCard, and suddenly everything we did would be obsolete. But the technology moved on. The web had come around. Expectations were different. The engineering resources weren't there. HyperCard went away. I was furious. I was furious when Apple decided to get rid of the little hack that let your Intel Mac run PowerPC software. Remember that? And then Lion came out, and suddenly all that software that you were still able to run just fine, even better because your machine was faster, you had to abandon. Because suddenly that little shim that carried you over the transition had been pulled out. You had to get new applications and learn new stuff again. And I began to feel more sympathy for the professor I worked with many, many years ago up at the, when UCLA had just implemented their very first word processing center for professors. So getting rid of a typing pool, they had a word processing center. And some professors were being given their own computers for the first time to do their own typing on. And I remember this very brilliant scholar of classics who said to me with a perfectly straight face, "I'm a scholar. I don't want to learn anything new."
Wow.
Yeah, it seems ridiculous, but I can feel that cry of the heart that she gave, because in fact, I have enough on my plate without learning something new that's not completely germane to me. I have a way of doing stuff on my computer. Why did you change it? I was just getting used to it. I don't want to learn anything new. I just want to get my work done. That's the dynamic that's always going to happen.
I obviously won't call any names, but I distinctly remember having lunch with my dad and a friend of my dad's who had recently retired from the machine tool industry. And a large part of the reason he had retired was that he said, "I am an expert in an industry that no longer exists." Because computerization had come along and down to the shop floor level, and all of a sudden all his institutional knowledge, unfortunately, was pretty much obsolete.
Chuck, I used to know how to distribute type back into a type case. Who does that these days?
Glenn Fleishman.
Now you're printing on a laser printer or what have you. You're done.
This edition of MacVoices is sponsored by Text Expander by Smile. The odds are that if you're working from home and will be for the foreseeable future. You are answering the same questions for clients over and over all day, and your coworkers and employees are probably doing the same thing. And that's where Text Expander can help. With Text Expander, you can craft the perfect answer to your frequently asked questions, put it in a snippet, then insert it into an email or a text message or a social media post with just a few keystrokes. Better than that, you can then share that across your entire organization so that everyone is delivering a consistent, high-quality message. That cuts down on confusion, mixed messages, and inaccurate information. That saves time in answering those questions and saves time by preventing follow-up questions. And company-wide snippets are just part of the story. Snippets can be customized to insert various specifics from a pre-created list so that your messages can be even more customized for your clients, yet consistent and accurate. And no matter what platform you're working on, Mac, iPhone, iPad, Windows, Chrome OS, or where you're working, home, office, car, in the backyard, in the basement, Text Expander is there for you to make you more productive and more consistent. Now, I can't understand why you wouldn't be using Text Expander, but if you haven't seen the light yet, you can visit TextExpander.com right now to give it a try for free. You will be up and running in minutes and being more productive immediately. Again, visit TextExpander.com for your free trial. Text Expander from Smile. See what all their world-class software can do for you at smilesoftware.com/podcasts. Thanks to Smile for being the longest-running sponsor of MacVoices. And that's where Michael, it's so important, I think. It's a message I wish I want to get across in MacVoices more and more. That's why we do these shows, and that's why we talk to you, and that's why you continue to write the books and update the books, because it's nothing to be afraid of. It's an opportunity for you to continue to grow and evolve and fine-tune your skills. And when you hit that point that you no longer want to do it, then absolutely buy the last Mac that will run what you want. Don't connect it to the internet, and stay there and be happy. But please don't ask the rest of us not to move along.
I didn't actually use the phrase in my book because it's a little off color, but one of the techniques I use and I'll stick in a polite word, productive fooling around. You can guess what word I'm replacing. But that's how I learn a lot of stuff on the Mac by when I don't have anything to do, I start just poking at it. What happens if I point here and do this? What happens if I drag this there? What happens if I hold down Option while clicking this button? Not because I'm trying to do anything. I want to just see what happens. So I can actually learn what some of the weird things are that are happening on the screen. I move my mouse around a lot and say, oh, buttons are appearing and disappearing just by moving over this area. That's interesting. I should remember that because those buttons may be useful. But you have to be open to just playing around in what seems like wasting your time. Being as a little child, little children are great at learning stuff because they're playing.
Yeah.
And in a sense, if you don't have at least a little bit of a playful attitude around this stuff, aside from the fact that your soul might be dead, you're probably not going to learn a whole lot of new stuff.
Wow, that's a pretty intense pronouncement there, Dr. Cohen. Wow.
Well, you have to have a little bit of playfulness in your heart, really, to use the technology, because there is a playful aspect to it. The fact that when you drag an icon off the dock and it goes poof with a cloud of smoke on your desktop, well, it doesn't have to do that to delete the icon. That's playful. It's an expression. There's a certain amount of expressivity in your machines as well, and you have to recognize that and honor that the people are behind all of the interfaces you use. Somewhere there was some human being who said, I think it should work this way because it makes sense to me, or it pleases me, or it might be fun. These just didn't get stamped out of a recipe book.
So you mentioned the disappearing interface, and I wanted to ask you about that, how you feel about that as an interface element. Because I understand the arguments for and against it. For is it's only there when you need it and it disappears so it doesn't clutter up your screen and distract you. But and the argument against is, so I got to go find it. And
yes.
And so how do you feel about that particular interface option?
I feel, as many people do, I can take it or leave it, in the sense that I like a clean looking screen as much as anyone. If I see an interface that's so crowded with visual options, I can't find the thing I actually want to work on because it's hidden, in a sense, by all the other blinky lights and switches. Clean is good. But if I'm looking for a control and I don't remember where it was and I have to do something to bring it into play, I'll be equally frustrated. There's no good answer to that. In a sense, it's like a book or a movie. It'll work for some people and not for others. I don't like hiding the interface without giving you at least a bit of a clue. But how you do discoverability, how you make something discoverable, is very, very tricky. And especially when you have a small screen like an iPhone, you don't have the space to layer a lot of stuff on that. So you have to have stuff that appears and disappears at need, stuff that hides off the edges of the screen that you have to bring onto the screen. How do you know they're off the edge of the screen until you drag them back onto the screen? In Mail on the Mac, you've got your whole list of mailboxes. You want to find the mailbox you're looking at. You don't want to accidentally click a control that's going to delete them. So those controls are hidden until you're actually over there to do that. But it will frustrate some people who didn't know that functionality was there in the first place and have been searching for it endlessly and never found it because they never thought to drag their mouse pointer over that area. So what do I think about it? It's a choice that works but has drawbacks. Think carefully if you're going to implement something that way. Find out how many users really get pissed off about it. If you're getting a lot of support email about that, then that's maybe a clue you want to change it because it's costing you money to answer those support calls. But it's like anything else in the arts. Depends on how it plays.
Well said. Well said. So the book is available now, and this is at takecontrolbooks.com, of course.
Right.
Do you know the pricing at this point, Michael?
I think it's $9.99.
Okay, so it's very affordable, obviously, like all Take Control books, and this sounds like one that okay. So look, we've gotten a little geeky here, in a very different kind of way, but I just feel like this is important because, and maybe I'm an interface snob, right? I really feel I understand how important interfaces are to usability, productivity, and just plain old, does it look good? And I work with way too many interfaces that don't fit any of those. And so I'm anxious to read this book and see what you can teach me about where some of these things came from and maybe some of the ones I don't particularly care for and why they evolved the way they did.
Well, it's been an interesting journey for me to say explicitly the stuff that I sort of knew implicitly all along, but revealing it, exposing it to myself was an interesting journey. So maybe it'll be an interesting journey for other people. Who knows? We'll find out.
Yes. Michael, where can they find you to tell you whether it's been an interesting journey for them or not? Where's the best place on social media to contact you?
Well, let's see. On Twitter, I'm at Lymond, Lymond. My email address is lymond@mac.com. If you want to send me email, I think that would be in the book as well. Certainly through Take Control Books, you can contact me through them. I write for Tidbits. You may be able to contact me through Tidbits as well. And if I'm ever let out of my apartment again, you might find me on the streets in Santa Monica wandering around,
Okay. Yeah, that one is kind of it's not in doubt. We just don't know when it'll happen. It'll happen. It'll happen. Michael, thank you. I'm telling you, I really enjoyed this. This has been a fascinating discussion and debate in places, and I'm really looking forward to the book.
Terrific. I'm glad to hear that. It's been fun for me too.
Yeah, we'll talk to you again soon.
All righty.
Folks, I'm Chuck Joyner. This is Mac Voices. Really, I hope you go and check this out, even if you're just curious about some of this stuff, because it may give you a little more insight into the interfaces and how they've evolved, but more importantly, why you like something and maybe why you don't like something else. Until the next time, and as always, thanks for watching. Visit MacVoices.com for show notes and to connect with Chuck on social media. Get involved in our Facebook group or like our Facebook page, and get more out of your Apple tech with MacVoices Magazine, free on Flipboard and on the web. And if you find value in it all, consider supporting us through either our Patreon campaign at patreon.com/MacVoices or by making a one-time donation via the PayPal link on our front page and in the show notes of each episode. You will join these fine people who help bring you Mac Voices. Advertising handled by Backbeat Media at backbeatmedia.com. Bandwidth provided by CashFly at cashfly.com. This is a not exactly cerebral, but a little more cerebral / historical. And I think that there's not enough of that in the world today. Too much of the time, we're being fed this is the way it should be, or this is good, without really explaining kind of why it's good, or maybe why it's not good. And yeah, so I applaud you for the book. Whether it's a success or not, I applaud you for it.
Thank you. One thing, that I say in the book about the iOS interface that I didn't work into the broadcast here today, but it's sort of a motif, is that using iOS is a lot like learning to play a musical instrument, because it involves eye-hand coordination and movements that don't necessarily map to the results. And I just think that's an interesting metaphor. Learning to play the violin is hard. There's no fret marks on the fretboard. How do you find what note you're going to play? You just have to kind of guess it. How do you know on the Mac that 3 fingers swiped that way? On the iOS, 3 fingers swiped that way will do a cut or a paste or something. It's gestures, and there's gestures that have to be coordinated in a way that a musician has to do. You can't be too sloppy. So it really requires a certain amount of dexterity, literal dexterity from users that Mac didn't ever really require. And that has to be factored into how you design things on iOS as well. How do you use a fingertip interface for people whose hands tremble, who aren't good with eye-hand coordination?
Yeah, that's really a fascinating way to look at it, because with the touches and the swipes and the force touches, or whatever they're calling them this month,
long pressing,
long pressing. It is that is a really good analogy. Even for someone who feels like the Mac is pretty darn intuitive, and now we feel like iOS is intuitive, but you definitely have to play a little more or see somebody play with it so that you can say, okay, well, I know that he swiped somewhere, so I'll just start swiping. And eventually you figure it out. And it's not like a 3-week eventually. It's like, a 1 or 2 time eventually. It's like, oh, this is how I do, because I want to do this. I need to do this. This is how I do it. So.
I remember hanging out with my musician friends when I was a teenager, and we go to shows and they want to be up close, not so they could hear it, but so they could watch how that guitarist was doing the thing that he did. Watch his fingerings. How did he get that effect? Where was he bending the note? And I'd be really into it. You have to watch others. And there's so much about using the Mac, using iOS, using Windows, using Android. It relies upon social tips, things your friends tell you, stuff that's passed around, that they're not in any book. Somebody says, oh, here, let me show you how to do that. Or here's a cool thing. And that's why the kids are often better at it than the grown-ups, because they're all used to saying, hey, let me show you something cool. They're all showing off to one another. You do that when you're a teenager. So they'll be showing off things they do on their phones or on their Macs or whatever. Whereas adults all want to look competent. So they don't want to look like they're fumbling. And they don't want to look like they're trying to get help from someone else. They're all scholars who don't want to learn anything new.